Within the peaceful lanes of Oak Ridge Heights, a lovely suburban enclave, the Blackwood household were a lighthouse of home happiness. Zephyr and Lorelei Blackwood embodied the American ideal to the casual observer. Successful jobs, a beautifully kept craftsman's house, and a marriage that appeared to become stronger year after year. Based on their regular dinner parties and coordinated running schedules, their neighbors often noted the couple's evident commitment to one another. Benevolent under their apparently flawless lives, the Blackwoods held a secret that would finally bring to their demise. For the last 2 years, Zephyr and Lorelei had been active members of a nearby swinging community, a way of life that promised to bring passion and thrills to their 10-year marriage. Their exploration of consensual non-monogamy first appeared to revive their relationship. They spoke of feeling closer, more honest, and more in love than they had ever known. But as with many things that sparkle, the reality of their chosen road was much more convoluted and dangerous than either could have predicted. Originally a shared journey in sexual discovery, what started out as a consensual experience would finally reveal long-hidden bitterness and deep-seated fears. This is the tale of how jealousy, wrath, and murder resulted from a couple's quest of thrills and pleasure. Rising player in the tech sector was Zephyr Blackwood. At a top software firm, he had ascended the corporate ladder rapidly using his keen intelligence and creative ideas. Colleagues said he was driven, charming, and sometimes forceful. Rising tall in a runner's body, Zephyr turned heads wherever he passed. Though he was successful professionally, those closest to him remarked a constant undertone of anxiety resulting from a childhood shaped by his parents' tumultuous divorce and his father's later disappearance. Perfect counterpart for Zephyr was Lorelei Blackwood. She was a gifted freelance and graphic designer who matched her more relaxed, creative attitude to life with her type A spouse. Lorelei was the type of girl who made friends easily and stayed with them for life. Warm eyes, contagious laughter, and curves that contradicted her yoga commitment. Growing up in a big, noisy household, she gave connection and transparency top priority. The pair ran across in their last year of university. While Lorelei found herself enthralled with Zephyr's drive and secret sensitivity, he was instantly pulled to her free spirit and creative abilities. 6 months after graduation, their whirlwind courtship resulted in a seashore proposal. A year later, they married in a grand wedding. The buzz of their social circle was all about. Over the first 7 years of their marriage, Zephyr and Lorelei looked to have it all. They made a house the envy of their friends, traveled great distances, and had successful jobs. But as they neared their middle 30s, unrest started to seep into their marriage. Once so brilliantly burning, the desire has darkened to a warm but uninspired light. Lorelei was the one who initially discussed investigating other paths in their sexual lives. She advised they go to a couple seminars on tantric techniques and BDSM, always the more sexually adventurous of the two. Desperate to satisfy his wife and renew their flame, Zephyr consented fervently. These seminars let the pair open fresh lines of communication and discovered they were talking about dreams and wishes they had never previously revealed. It was during one of these talks when swinging first came up. Inspired by the concept of consensual non-monogamy, Lorelei had read about it online. Originally dubious, Zephyr warmed to the idea as Lorelei created a picture of more closeness and shared experiences. The Blackwoods chose to go. After months of debate, investigation, and soul-searching, they made profiles on swinger websites, went to a few meet and greetings, and at last engaged in their first complete exchange with another couple. The encounter was thrilling, and for a while, it appeared to revive their marriage. Little did they realize that their choice would start a series of events that would finally result in catastrophe. The Blackwoods' arrival into the swinging scene was accompanied by a mixture of wary hope and apprehensive exhilaration. Their first encounter surpassed their expectations, a gentle exchange with a couple they found via a respectable swinger website. Laughter, flirting, and a degree of sexual tension neither Zephyr or Lorelei had known in years permeated the evening. Hands linked, they couldn't stop smiling at each other, already organizing their next meeting as they drove home. Zephyr and Lorelei started showing quite often in swinging scenes during the following 2 months. They went to parties at fancy clubs, took part in small get-togethers at houses, and even planned some of their own. Their social circle grew quickly and was full of like-minded couples that shared their need for adventure and sexual inquiry. In particular, Lorelai found great success in these new surroundings. Among their swinging friends, she was preferred because of her inherent charm and open-mindedness. She loved the attention men and women paid her, and her confidence shone. Zephyr, too, originally seemed to prosper. He took delight in having a wife that others wanted, and from the ego boost, other women found him appealing. The couple's sex life, between themselves and with others, reached new heights of intensity and passion. They found themselves playing with fantasies and fetishes they had never previously given thought. Lorelai would often joke that in their first year of marriage, they had less sex than they were now. The Blackwoods started developing closer relationships with some of the couples they met as they became more at ease with the way of life. They especially resonated with Ether and Nova Sterling, two free-spirited artists who had spent years in the swinging culture. Usually, getting together for dinner and drinks, the four of them would always result in heated experiences that would satisfy everyone. But as the months passed, minute changes in Zephyr and Lorelai's relationships dynamics started to show. Lorelai kept enthusiastically embracing the way of life, but Zephyr began to exhibit symptoms of discomfort. He started to observe the way other guys interacted with their swinging partners. Flirting let them and connecting with ease. Once a cause of pride, what now caused uneasy emotions in his gut. Zephyr discovered he was focusing more on Lorelai's exchanges, particularly with Ether Sterling. He couldn't help but find the residual touches, the private jokes, the way Lorelai's eyes appeared to sparkle in Ether's company. Rational thinking informed him that Lorelai always came home with him at the end of the evening. This was all part of the game, but a niggling voice in the rear of his brain murmured questions and stoked his mounting anxiety. Though he felt differently, Zephyr suppressed his emotions. He wanted not to let Lorelai down or show weakness to their new friends. When Zephyr faces the truth he has been dodging, will everything collapse, or can he hang on to the life he thought he wanted? Zephyr and Lorelai seemed to be living exciting lives in part one, really embracing the swinging universe. Zephyr started to feel more and more uneasy and insecure when Lorelai shared the fresh experiences. He felt great discomfort when he saw the lingering touches and covert talks between Lorelai and Ether Sterling. The fissures in their relationship were showing even with his best attempts to hide his emotions and bury himself further into the way of life. Zephyr's uncertainty deepened until he came to the alarming knowledge that the same way of living supposed to deepen their connection may be separating them. Rather, he poured himself into the way of life with fresh intensity. He started more meetings, proposed more crazier situations, and pushed his bounds beyond than he was really comfortable with, as if attempting to prove something to himself and others. Lost in the thrills and fresh encounters, Lorelai missed the minute behavioral changes in her spouse. She saw his growing passion as evidence that he was appreciating the lifestyle just as much as she did. Swinging had, in her opinion, brought them closer together and created fresh channels of contact and shared experiences. In their swinging group, the Blackwoods were considered a success story. As their second anniversary and the lifestyle drew near, they were appealing, entertaining, and apparently more in love than they had been years before. Benevolent on the surface, the seeds of conflict had been sowed. The exact way they had revitalized their marriage was now discreetly separating them and preparing the ground for the terrible events that were to follow. Initially, the Blackwoods' apparently flawless layout started to show minor flaws. Zephyr started making casual remarks about reducing their swinging activity and advised they concentrate more on their personal relationship. Lorelai, seeing this as a transitory mood, gently dismissed his worries and urged him to welcome the freedom and thrill they had unearthed. Weeks went by, and Zephyr's jealousy became increasingly obvious. He began to probe Lorelai on her contacts with other men, especially Ether Sterling. Originally lighthearted, his questions became more frequent and forceful. Once, he had loved seeing Lorelai with other partners, but now found himself staring away, a knot developing in his gut. For her part, Lorelai found it difficult to grasp her husband's transformation, emphasizing that their swinging experiences were just physical and did not jeopardize their emotional tie. She reassured him of her love and dedication many times. But as Zephyr's fears grew, her remarks seemed to go unheard. Their everyday lives started to show the strain between them. Arguments regarding swinging swiftly descended into more general charges and denials. Zephyr would dredge up previous resentments and challenge Lorelai's loyalty even prior to they adopted the way of life. Frustrated by what she saw as Zephyr's illogical actions, Lorelai started to retreat and become defensive. Usually laser-focused at work, their professional life began to veer toward distraction and agitation. His associates sensed the shift and murmured about likely household problems. Lorelai found it more and more difficult to please customers and reach deadlines because her job needed imagination and a good attitude. Lorelai was hesitant to give up the way of life that had offered her so much happiness and self-discovery, even if the conflict was mounting. Hoping to reduce Zephyr's envy, she advised they pause from group activities and concentrate on one-on-one meetings. But even this compromise resulted in strife when Zephyr accused Lorelai of attempting to control the circumstances to suit her. The Blackwoods' front of home happiness started to fall apart as their conflicts became more heated. In a last-ditch attempt to save their marriage, Zephyr advised they see counselors. Lorelai accepted, hoping that a professional might guide them through the complicated feelings their non-monogamous adventure set off. Their annoyance was exacerbated, however, by difficulty locating a therapist who was both competent and non-judging about their way of life. Tension in the Blackwood mansion peaked as the date of a forthcoming swinger party thrown by the Sterlings neared approached. Seeing it as a chance to reestablish friends standing in the community, Lorelai was resolved to show up. Reluctantly consenting to leave, torn and angry, Zephyr set the scene for the sad events that would transpire. May 15th's evening arrived warm and bright, just what a spring day ought to be. The Blackwoods started getting ready for the Sterling celebration. As evening fell, an undertone of conflict permeated them. Choosing a silky black dress that highlighted her curves, Lorelai hummed to herself as she put her makeup on. Watching her from the doorway, Zephyr felt a familiar combination of want and anxiety coiling in his gut. They arrived to the elegant loft owned by the Sterlings just as the celebration was getting underway. Soft, multicolored lights enveloped the large apartment, and seductive music throbbed from concealed speakers. Couples and single people mixed, drinks in hand, the air heavy with pheromones and expectation. Resplendent in a glittering gold jumpsuit, Nova Sterling welcomed them kindly. Zephyr saw how her hug with Lorelai lasted, the two ladies sharing knowing grins. Moments after, Ether came up, patting Zephyr on the behind and gently kissing Lorelai's face. The knot in Zephyr's gut intensified. Zephyr found himself becoming more restless as the evening went on. Lorelai fluttered from group to group, her laughter filling the room. He watched. She exuded sensuality and confidence, clearly in her element. Zephyr, on the other hand, felt uncomfortable and out of place drinking the same beverage for hours as he watched the interactions around him. As couples started to pair up or create small groups and vanish into the many playrooms the Sterlings had set aside, the celebration started to change direction. For a while, Zephyr lost sight of Lorelai. His anxiousness surged as he looked around the packed loft. At last, he saw her engaged in discussion with Ether, their heads close together as they murmured softly. Zephyr approached the duo, unable to control himself anymore. He caught the tail end of their discussion, something about a later-in-the-week coffee gathering. Lorelai's eyes grew significantly as she saw Zephyr, a flutter of shame over her face before she steadied herself. With his voice taut with barely controlled rage, Zephyr said it was time to go out. Lorelai objected, claiming the evening was not over. Though they spoke softly, their argument attracted interested looks from surrounding visitors. Sensing the conflict, Ether sought to settle matters, but his involvement appeared to aggravate Zephyr even more. Nova showed there, deftly navigating the conflict as it threatened to become more heated. She led Zephyr and Lorelai to a quiet area of the loft with trained ease, urging them to relax, reminding them of the community's focus on honest communication and mutual respect. She gave them water and kind words of advice. It appeared as if Nova's intervention had calmed the matter momentarily. Zephyr inhaled deeply and clearly tried to relax. Lorelai stretched out and conciliatively squeezed his hand. But Zephyr saw Ether staring closely as they rose to rejoin the celebration. Zephyr's fragile control snapped under something in the other man's sight. Compassion, pity, or maybe something else totally. Declaring he and Lorelai were going in a chilly, clipped voice. Lorelai argued not this time. She knew staying would only result in a scene. She could see the storm building behind Zephyr's eyes. Apologizing heavily to Nova and dodging Ether's stare, Lorelai let Zephyr guide her out of the loft. There was stillness on the trip home. The tension between them was almost oppressive. Lorelei glanced out the window, her former energy replaced with a cautious tiredness. Zephyr held the steering wheel so firmly that his knuckles became white. He negotiated the almost deserted streets, his jaw strained. Neither moved to get out of the vehicle right away as they drew into their driveway. They sat silently for a long time, the weight of unsaid words down on them. At last, Lorelei turned to Zephyr, her voice kind yet forceful, as she stated, "We have to discuss this. We cannot live like this." Stiffly nodding, Zephyr's face in the low light was incomprehensible. Once the truth at last surfaces, what? Part 3 sets the scene for a confrontation that will leave nothing unaltered by the crumbling veneer and exploding concealed emotions. Part 2 saw Zephyr's growing unease with the swinging way of life start to affect his relationship with Lorelei. The doubts and anxieties that had been festering under the surface eventually surfaced, even as he tried to bury his misgivings and sink himself further into the way of life. The turning moment occurred during an extravagant celebration when Zephyr saw an unavoidable growing bond between Lorelei and Ether Sterling. Unspoken emotions hung thick in the air as the evening went on, clearly straying Zephyr from Lorelei. Silent, the trip home carried the expectation of a confrontation, neither of which could evade. It was obvious as they got home that the chat they were about would permanently alter their lives. He left the vehicle without saying and went for the main door. Lorelei followed, her heart heavy with the realization that the next talk would probably permanently alter their life. Neither of them could have guessed how prescient that sensation might prove to be. The front door closed behind them, and the public facade of calm they had established collapsed. Zephyr turned on Lorelei, his face twisted with a combination of anguish and rage. All the doubts and anxieties he had been carrying for months suddenly found expression as the words spilled out of him in a tsunami of accusations and complaints. He screamed about her conduct at the party, about her blatant flirtation with Ether and others. He brought up earlier interactions, carefully analyzing them with an eye toward signs of treachery in the most minute movements and looks. His voice grew as he discussed the coffee arrangements he had heard, certain were evidence of a continuing affair. Originally taken aback by the violence of Zephyr's outburst, Lorelei found her own resentment mounting to match his. She fiercely defended herself, telling him that their trip into swinging and their relationship had always been based on transparency and honesty, pointing out his own active engagement in their lifestyle choice. Until lately, she accused him of hypocrisy. Their dispute permeated the home, a symphony of resentment and misinterpretation. Lorelei attempted to persuade Zephyr that his jealousy was unwarranted, but her words appeared to fly off him without effect. Frustrated, she raised his own deviations within the swinging society and questioned why it was okay for him, but not for her. This did nothing but irritate Zephyr further. He progressed on Lorelei, his towering form hanging over her as he backed her into a living room corner. Feeling caught and more afraid by Zephyr's unusual hostility, Lorelei tried to pass by him. At that instant, something in Zephyr caught. Lorelei grasped her arms as he attempted to go, his fingers bruisingly burrowing into her flesh. Her eyes wide with incredulity, Lorelei yelled out in anguish and amazement, staring at the man she had loved for more than 10 years, now unrecognizable in his wrath. She battled his hold, her own rage giving way to terror as she came to see how out of hand the matter had become. Lost in a cloud of jealousy and resentment, Zephyr seemed unable to hear her cries to let go. Lorelei's palm grabbed Zephyr across the face in her effort to get away. Her nails left furious red marks on his cheek. The physical touch seemed to drive Zephyr over the brink. He pushed Lorelei hard, roaring inarticulate wrath. Her heel caught on the edge of the area rug as she staggered backward. She dropped, and time seemed to slow as she fought to catch herself with her arms. But her skull thuddingly impacted the corner of the solid wood coffee table, and there was nothing to halt her fall. The sound seemed to startle Zephyr from his ecstasy. Frozen, he watched in terror as Lorelei collapsed to the ground, a little pool of blood starting to develop under her head. Only Zephyr's raspy breathing shattered the awful quiet that followed. He stayed still for many lengthy stretches as his mind battled to understand what had just transpired. Then he staggered toward Lorelei's lifeless figure, as though negotiating molasses. Hands trembling, he dropped to his knees next to her and stretched out to touch her. Her skin was still warm, but he sought feverishly for a pulse and came empty. Like a tidal wave, the truth of the matter slammed over Zephyr. He had done the unthinkingly horrible. He had killed the lady he loved in a flash of uncontrollable rage. Zephyr let out a wail of suffering as the severity of his deeds sank in, holding Lorelei's dead corpse in his arms as tears flowed down his cheeks. Startled by the sound of hopelessness radiating from the Blackwood house, a neighbor strolling his dog stopped on the peaceful suburban street outside. For years to come, this wail would linger over the community, signifying the moment when a beloved marriage ended in unthinkable catastrophe. Police cruisers and an ambulance broke the early morning peace of Oak Ridge Heights, with their lights alternately flashing red and blue on the tree-lined boulevard. Emerging from their houses, neighbors watched the situation develop with a mixture of interest and fear. Veteran of Homicide Division, Detective Rhiannon Frost, showed up on the scene not long after the initial responders. She was startled by the contrast between the Blackwood house's groomed facade and the turmoil within as she squeezed beneath the crime scene tape. Once a display of elegant furniture, the living room now clearly showed violence. The coffee table was askew, a light lay broken on the floor, and in the middle of all was the corpse of Lorelei Blackwood, half covered by a sheet. With trained precision, forensic professionals walked the room photographing and gathering evidence. Frost's sharp eyes noted every element. Dr. Kai Nakamura gave her an overview of their first results. The cause of death seems to be head blunt force trauma from maybe a collision with the coffee table corner. The victim clearly showed signs of struggle, including defensive wounds on her hands and bruises on her arms. Frost's eye caught Zephyr Blackwood sat in a dining room chair, his head in his hands, while Nakamura talked. Now rumpled and discolored, he was still sporting the clothing from the previous night's party. Not far away was a uniformed police watching the unhappy spouse closely. Frost went up to Zephyr, her trained eye detecting his blood streaks on his shirt and scratched cheek. His voice strained with tears. Then he started to tell a story of a party, a dispute, and a terrible disaster. Frost's senses warned her, listening, that the narrative went beyond what Zephyr was saying. His story appeared scripted, devoid of the genuine passion one would have expected from a guy who had just lost his wife. She mentally noted her need to learn more about the couple's recent activities and history. Outside, the neighbors gathered in small groups, passing startled murmurs and suspicious looks. The Blackwoods had always looked to be so ideal, so cheerful. What could have gone so very wrong? Detective Frost and her colleagues worked non-stop in the days after Lorelei Blackwood's murder to put together the events that preceded that fatal evening. Their research started to expose, behind the surface of the Blackwoods' apparently perfect existence, a convoluted network of ties and secret conflicts. Friends and co-workers' interviews presented an image of a couple that had lately adopted a swinging lifestyle. Although many people expressed astonishment at this disclosure, a small number offered insightful analysis of the mechanics of the Blackwoods' open marriage. Particularly, Nova Sterling proved to be a vital witness, relating the debate she had seen at the clear conflict between Zephyr and Lorelei. Deeper investigation turned up a trail of digital data illuminating the couple's personal lives for the cops. Emails and text exchanges exposed Zephyr's developing jealousy and Lorelei's mounting annoyance with his actions. A sequence of letters between Lorelei and Ether Sterling on Zephyr's recent mood swings and Lorelei's worries about the future of her marriage particularly proved damaging. As the truth about Lorelei's death surfaces in Part 4, the inquiry becomes more thorough and secrets are revealed. What really occurred that evening? And can Zephyr keep his narrative intact? Part 3 saw a breaking point in the conflict between Zephyr and Lorelei. Following a night of unsaid feelings and simmering resentment, the couple went home, where their public front collapsed at last. Zephyr was ready to face Lorelei. But before from Ether, Sterling cut off the moment and left Zephyr on edge, and the scenario more tense than ever. Everything hung precariously on their unsaid awareness that their relationship was about to collapse. More striking evidence against Zephyr came from forensic examination of the murder site. Lorelei's fatal injuries angle and power defied a straightforward fall's direction. Under Lorelei's fingernails, DNA evidence matched Zephyr's, therefore confirming the indicators of a fight. Moreover, toxicological studies revealed that while Lorelei had a little alcohol in her system, Zephyr's blood alcohol level had been much greater, indicating he could have been more disabled than he first stated. Detective Frost hauled Zephyr in for many demanding questions as the inquiry developed. His well-crafted story started to fall apart under the constant strain of interrogation. His tale revealed contradictions, and his manner changed from bereaved widow to a guy driven by remorse and anxiety. In a startling change of events, Ether Sterling offered further information, citing his more demanding and jealous conduct. He said that Lorelei had confided in him about her intentions to leave Zephyr. This disclosure suggested that the murder could have been planned rather than a heat-of-the-moment crime of passion, therefore offering Zephyr a plausible motivation for his activities. The inquiry also revealed bank documents showing Zephyr had lately asked about the couple's life insurance plans, which added even another level of suspicion to his behavior. Friends said he had been under more stress at work because there were reports of possible layoffs at his workplace. The prosecution started to build a solid case against Zephyr Blackwood as the evidence grew. The story that surfaced was one of a man who, confronted with the possibility of losing his wife, as well as his meticulously maintained appearance of success, had reacted in jealous wrath with disastrous results, promising to reveal the secret world of suburban swingers and the terrible effects of envy unleashed. The scene was set for a trial that would enthrall the city and beyond. Opening the proceedings with a forceful speech, prosecutor Vivian Zhao vividly depicted a marriage wrecked by envy and a woman's life cut short. Driven by his incapacity to control her and his dread of losing her, she pledged to show, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Zephyr Blackwood had killed his wife in a fit of anger. The defense responded with a story of a sad accident brought on by a love marriage stressed by lifestyle choices, neither of which either side was completely ready for. Holloway aimed to show Zephyr as a committed spouse, overwhelmed by events beyond his control. A stream of witnesses stepped up as the trial went on. Important evidence on the Blackwoods' participation in the swinging society and their obvious conflict on the evening of Lorelei's murder came from Nova and Ether Sterling. Their stories were sensational and enlightening, stirring the courtroom and creating provocative headlines, with Dr. Kai Nakamura providing devastating evidence on the kind of Lorelei's injuries. Forensic specialists provided thorough studies of the murder scene. His claim that the fatal wound contradicted an unintentional fall seriously weakened the case of the defense. Zephyr Blackwood's own stand throughout the trial turned out to be maybe the most dramatic event. Under Holloway's meticulous direction, he portrayed himself as a guy utterly in love with his wife, who had consented to investigate swinging to satisfy her. He spoke of his increasing unease with the way of life and his worries of losing Lorelei to it. But Zephyr's well-crafted facade started to fall apart under Zhao's unrelenting questioning. She challenged him with emails, text messages, and witness testimony refuting his account of events. Zephyr's calm fell as the interrogation became more intense, showing glimpses of the envy and wrath that had preceded that terrible night. Under the assault of the prosecution, the gallery watched in rapt attention as Zephyr battled to preserve his narrative. As he recounted the last fight with Lorelei, his voice broke, and for a while it appeared as if he may fall apart and admit. Still, he kept himself under control, clinging to his assertion of a fatal accident until very last. Both the prosecution and the defense gave passionate final remarks as the trial drew to end. Zhao asked the jury to reject Zephyr's falsehoods and hold him responsible for the terrible deed that had cut Lorelei's life short. Then Holloway begged the jurors to take into account the nuanced feelings and events that had resulted in this catastrophe. The case was handed over to the jury with the evidence presented and arguments made. A tight quiet descended the courtroom as they filed out to start discussions. Now, their hands held Zephyr Blackwood's destiny. The jury reached a decision in less than 6 hours overall. The neighborhood was rocked, and Lorelei's bereaved family and friends felt some closure when Zephyr Blackwood was convicted guilty of second-degree murder. Referring to the heinous nature of the act and Zephyr's lack of regret, the court sentenced him 25 years to life in prison. The repercussions of the trial permanently changed the neighborhood. The case had revealed the secret world of suburban swingers, sparking intense moral, trust, and contemporary relationship discussion. While some couples who had been part of the lifestyle discreetly withdrew, others become active supporters of ethical non-monogamy, stressing the need of communication and permission. Ultimately, the sad tale of Zephyr and Lorelei Blackwood acted as a sobering warning that envy, distrust, and unbridled rage may destroy even the closest relationships. Their narrative would be remembered not just as a dramatic crime, but also as a nuanced human tragedy resulting from the continuous conflict between love, ambition, and the need for control.